You know, in a world where all the old rules seem to be changing, there's one country right at the center of it all, performing this incredibly delicate balancing act. So today, we're going to dive into India's big, ambitious journey to figure out its place and help shape a whole new global order.
For the longest time, the world order was, well, pretty predictable. But that's just not the case anymore. Just look at this. The massive jump in things like GDP and military spending, especially from China and now India, well, that isn't just numbers on a chart. It's a total reshaping of global power. The game has absolutely changed.
And this quote, it just nails the new reality. We're living in a multipolar world now. It's a place where influence isn't just in one spot anymore. It's spread out, it's contested. It's a world with a bunch of great powers, and every single one of them has its own idea of what the future should look like.
Okay, so how does India even begin to navigate a world like this? Well, its biggest challenge, hands down, is managing its relationships with the two giants of our time, its neighbor and rival, China, and its growing strategic partner, the United States. It's a real tightrope walk.
And here's where we get to the heart of the problem. When you look at their own neighborhood, Asia, India, and China want fundamentally different things. India's vision is for an Asia with lots of different centers of power, a shared space. China, on the other hand, it sees a future with Beijing right at the center of everything. And you can see how those two visions are pretty much on a collision course.
But here's the thing. It's not all conflict. It gets more complicated than that. If you look at where their interests actually line up, both countries want a more fair and equitable global order. They both believe in the idea of not intervening in other countries' affairs. So it's a really important reminder that this rivalry is super complex with these surprising pockets of common ground.
Which brings us to probably the single most important idea you need to understand Indian foreign policy: strategic autonomy. Basically, it's the idea that India isn't going to get locked into a formal alliance with anyone. It's going to make its own calls based on its own interests. It'll work with everybody, but it won't be tied to anybody. And that's why it's a huge mistake to just think of India as some kind of anti-China shield for the West. It's playing its own game.
Now, that idea of strategic autonomy doesn't mean it can't have really deep friendships, especially with the United States. That relationship is pretty much built on three main pillars. You've got the shared values of being democracies, the strategic goal of balancing out China's influence, and this economic dream of India becoming a new engine for global growth. But while those pillars are strong, trust me, each one has its own little cracks and friction points.
And that brings us to a really crucial question. For India to be a big player on the world stage, it needs a rock-solid foundation back home. But can its domestic reality actually support its global ambitions? Let's take a look.
So here's the big ambition: to become a major hub in global supply chains. A real alternative to China, an engine of growth for the world. And it's a vision that partners like the US are really pushing for, as they try to de-risk and not have all their eggs in one basket.
Okay, but ambition is one thing. Having the foundation to back it up is another thing entirely. So how strong is India's domestic economic base really? To get a feel for the challenge here, let's just zoom in on one basic but super important sector: growing cotton.
All right, I'm going to throw a number at you. Around 450 kilograms per hectare. Now, on its own, that probably doesn't mean much to you, but just hold that number in your head for a second, because when you see it in context, the picture becomes, well, pretty alarming.
And boom, this chart says it all. India's yield is barely half the global average. And then look at a country like Brazil. It's not even close. Brazil gets 4 times more cotton from the same piece of land. And listen, this isn't just about cotton. This points to a much, much bigger challenge with productivity across the board.
So what's going on? Why are the yields so low? Well, it's a whole mix of deep systemic issues. You've got pests like the pink bollworm, a massive dependency on the monsoon rains, which are super unpredictable, soil that's losing its fertility, and millions of small farmers who just don't have access to modern tech. These are tough structural problems that you have to solve if you want to build that global manufacturing hub.
But a country's strength isn't just about economic numbers. To be seen as a real global leader, its social progress is just as important. It's about keeping a promise to your own people, especially to the youngest generation.
And one of the key ways the world measures this is through the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, specifically Goal 5.3, which is a global pledge to completely end child marriage by the year 2030. And this isn't just a social goal, it's tied directly to things like poverty, health, and education.
So, in India today, the rate of child marriage is at 23.3%.
And we have to be clear here. That represents incredible progress. That number was almost 48% back in 2005. So they literally cut it in half. That is a huge achievement.
But, and this is a really big but, the story has a twist. While the long-term trend looks great, if you look closer, the pace of change has just hit a wall. After that massive 21-point drop over about a decade, the rate only fell by another 3.5 points in the next 5 years. Progress is slowed to a crawl.
So what's holding things back? The data here tells a really clear story. Child marriage is overwhelmingly linked to two things: poverty and a lack of education. Almost half of all girls with no schooling are married before they're adults. Compare that to just 4% for those with higher education. This isn't just a social issue, it's a deeply rooted economic one too.
Okay, so let's pull back and put all these pieces together. We've talked about foreign policy, the economic foundation, and social progress. So what does it all mean for India's role in the world?
It really boils down to this. India is facing a three-part challenge, and all three parts are connected. First, it has to juggle those incredibly complex rivalries on the world stage. Second, it has to strengthen its own economic engine at home to fix those productivity gaps. And third, it has to speed up its social progress to empower all its citizens.
And that right there is the heart of India's great balancing act. Its global dreams, its vision for a new world order, all of it is completely tied to its ability to solve these fundamental challenges right here at home. Success abroad depends on success at home.
And so that leaves us with the big final question. The ambition is there, the potential is definitely there, but can India fix its internal economic and social challenges fast enough to turn all that potential into real, tangible power and truly help shape the world order? The answer to that is going to define not just India's future, but all of ours.